Imagine sitting at a table surrounded by your entire family and hearing your own father announce you're getting nothing while everyone else cheers. That was my reality. I'm Emma Callahan. I spent my life trying to make a difference, only to be laughed at by the people who were supposed to believe in me. But what they didn't know was that someone had left me a secret gift that could change everything. If you've ever felt underestimated by the ones you love, stay with me and tell me, have you ever been surprised by someone you least expected? The scent of grilled corn and slow-cooked pork drifted through the crisp fall air as I stepped onto the backyard patio of the Callahan estate. Fairy lights twinkled between the old oak trees, casting a warm, golden glow over tables piled high with apple pies and pulled pork sliders. Everyone was laughing, clinking glasses, and exchanging handshakes. It was a celebration, at least for everyone else. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, feeling the familiar weight of my grandmother's compass pendant resting against my collarbone. She used to say that real direction didn't always come from family. Tonight, the pendant felt heavier than ever. The estate hadn't changed much since I was a child. The same cobblestone paths, the same dock stretching out onto the lake. But the people, oh, the people, they had changed. Or maybe it was me who had grown into someone they no longer recognized. "Emma, good to see you," someone said as they breezed past me, barely slowing down. I offered a polite smile, but they were already moving toward Landon, my younger brother, who stood at the center of the gathering like a sun orbited by lesser stars. He looked the part too, crisp navy suit, dazzling white smile, that effortless charm that seemed to ooze out of his pores. People clapped him on the back, laughing a little too loudly at his stories. Stories I had heard dozens of times, but had learned to tune out long ago. I hovered near one of the buffet tables, picking half-heartedly at a slider, trying to pretend I didn't notice the way conversations dipped whenever I approached. Charity work just didn't sparkle the way corporate conquests did, I supposed. Across the yard, I caught a glimpse of my father, George Callahan, standing with Victoria, my stepmother. They looked like the perfect picture of power, he stern and proud, she poised and polished. They both raised their glasses in a toast, and the crowd hushed. "Tonight," George began, his voice cutting through the evening air, "we celebrate not just a milestone for our family business, but the bright future ahead." He turned to Landon, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Landon Callahan represents everything the Callahan legacy stands for: strength, loyalty, and an unbreakable commitment to excellence." The crowd erupted in applause. I forced a smile, my cheeks aching from the effort. "And of course," George added with a sly smile, "we must also acknowledge those among us who chose other paths, dreamers, idealists, the ones who find fulfillment not in building empires, but in chasing causes." A ripple of polite laughter passed through the guests. I felt my face flush, a slow, creeping heat that had nothing to do with the nearby fire pits. It wasn't the first time he had belittled my choices, but somehow, under the soft twinkle of the lights and the expectant eyes of so many people, it cut deeper. I lowered my gaze, my fingers tightening around the compass hidden beneath my blouse. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "Don't measure your worth by their yardstick, Emma. Some of the strongest hearts beat the quietest." As George continued to praise Landon's pragmatism and business acumen, I let the words wash over me, heavy and meaningless. I didn't belong here. Not really. I never had. This wasn't my celebration. It wasn't my world. A hand brushed my elbow, startling me. Victoria leaned in, her smile frosted with just enough sweetness to sting. "You must be so proud of your brother," she whispered. I nodded stiffly, my throat too tight to form words. Pride wasn't the emotion swirling inside me. It was something heavier, sadder, a mourning for the family I used to imagine we could be. George lifted his glass one final time, his voice booming once more. "And because tonight is about looking ahead, We have a very special announcement to make about the future of Callahan Enterprises. But, he added with a wink, that will come a little later. For now, eat, drink, and celebrate. The guests cheered, raising their glasses high. I sipped my wine, the taste sour against my tongue, and wondered how much longer I could pretend to belong at a party that wasn't meant for me. In the distance, the lake rippled under the rising moonlight, a quiet, steady force beyond all the noise and celebration. I clutched my grandmother's compass tighter, grounding myself for what I could feel gathering on the horizon, something far bigger than a simple toast or a polite snub. Something was coming, and somehow, I knew it was meant for me. The chill deepened as the sun dipped behind the hills, and the soft orange glow from the fairy lights grew sharper against the darkening sky. I found myself seated at the long oak table set beneath the largest tree in the yard, the rough wood cool beneath my hands. Plates were being cleared away, wine glasses refilled, the clatter and laughter slowly giving way to a more formal silence. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. George stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding. Victoria perched gracefully at his side, her smile fixed, her fingers lightly tracing the stem of her wine glass. Landon lounged in his seat, utterly at ease, the picture of someone certain the world was about to hand him everything he ever wanted. A white envelope appeared in George's hand. My breath caught. He tapped it once against the table before sliding it with a practiced, deliberate motion. It landed in front of Landon. For a moment, I sat still, blinking as though I could will the scene into something different. It didn't work. "As of today," George announced, his voice ringing clear and sure, "Landon Callahan will be the sole heir to Callahan Enterprises, the family estate, and all associated assets, both domestic and international." A smattering of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then gathering strength. Victoria beamed at Landon, her pride practically radiating off her in waves. Some of the guests clapped dutifully, a few more enthusiastically, but no one looked at me. Not really. I sat there frozen, my hands folded tightly in my lap, nails digging into the soft fabric of my dress. I wondered if anyone else could hear the roaring in my ears. Somewhere in the back of my mind, my grandmother's voice surfaced, steady and sad. "Power without kindness is hollow, Emma. Never forget that." I blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears welling up in my eyes fall. I would not give them the satisfaction. George wasn't finished. He smiled, that thin-lipped, patronizing smile I remembered too well from every childhood report card that didn't meet his impossible standards. "And of course," he continued, turning slightly toward me now, his voice almost jovial, "we must acknowledge Emma's efforts." I felt the weight of every gaze shift, pressing down like a stone. I wished I could disappear. While some in this family have chosen to pursue less traditional paths, George said, pausing just long enough for the insinuation to land, we respect those decisions. After all, not everyone is built for the rigors of business. A ripple of polite laughter skimmed the table. I stared down at the grain of the wood, tracing it with my eyes to keep from bolting upright and running. "My daughter," George went on, "has spent her years building shelters, feeding the homeless, and working with admirable causes." His tone made it sound like he was speaking of a child's art project, something sweet but ultimately insignificant. "So tonight, we honor her choice by granting her the freedom she so clearly desires." He lifted his glass, as if toasting to my banishment. "The freedom to keep wandering," he said. The laughter was louder this time, more assured, more cutting. Even people who once knew me well, friends of my childhood summers, the children of my father's business partners, averted their eyes or smiled awkwardly, complicit in their silence. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat harder to bear than the last. I pressed a trembling hand against my blouse, feeling for the compass pendant, hidden and small against my skin. I thought of my grandmother's hands, steady even in her final days, when she had told me, "The strongest foundations are built in silence, Emma. Not everyone will hear your truth, but that doesn't make it less real." At the far end of the table, Mr. Brooks, the family lawyer, shifted uncomfortably. His fingers fumbled slightly with the folder he held, his brow furrowed, and for a moment he looked as though he might say something, then thought better of it. The cold seeped deeper into my bones, though the evening was still young. I sat rigid, my throat burning with the effort it took to remain composed. George turned back to Landon, his smile full and approving now. Landon, for his part, looked down at the envelope, then up at me, just briefly. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not regret, not guilt, triumph. It was almost enough to break me. Almost. I squeezed the compass tighter, feeling the edges bite into my palm. Mr. Brooks cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but it sliced through the murmured congratulations and low laughter like a crack of thunder. "Actually," he said, his voice carefully measured, "there's something else your mother insisted on before she passed." A hush fell over the table. Even George's smile faltered, just for a second. The chill in the air seemed to deepen, the fairy lights flickering in the sudden, heavy silence. I looked up, meeting Mr. Brooks's gaze for the first time that evening. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tightness around his mouth that made my heart pound faster. Something was happening, something George hadn't planned for, and for the first time all night, a tiny ember of hope sparked quietly in my chest. It only takes one signature to change a future, or to reveal a secret. I had learned that lesson as a child, sneaking up into my grandmother's dusty attic when no one was looking. Amid boxes of old photographs and moth-eaten quilts, there had been a small wooden plaque nailed to a rafter. Its message, written in faded, careful script, had stayed with me. True strength is quiet. Tonight, under the ancient oak tree bathed in fairy lights, the truth was about to speak louder than anyone had expected. Mr. Brooks held a slim leather folder against his chest, his mouth a tight line. Guests leaned forward in their chairs, craning to hear, their wine glasses forgotten. The chilly air wrapped itself tighter around us, as if the night itself was holding its breath. George's jaw twitched. "What are you talking about, Brooks?" he barked, trying to inject authority into his voice. "There's nothing else." Mr. Brooks didn't flinch. Instead, he carefully placed the folder on the table, unfastening the leather ties with slow, deliberate movements that made every second stretch unbearably long. "This document," Mr. Brooks said, lifting a sealed envelope from within, "was prepared by your late mother, Mrs. Eleanor Callahan, approximately 6 years ago. She instructed that it remain sealed unless and until a specific condition was triggered." I could see the tremor in George's hand as he gripped the back of his chair. Victoria stiffened beside him, her manicured nails biting into the wood. Landon shifted uncomfortably, his confidence bleeding away in real time. Mr. Brooks cleared his throat again. His voice when he spoke was steady and formal. "The condition," he said, "was simple. If George Callahan ever attempted to disinherit Emma Callahan, the controlling 51% share of Callahan Enterprises, which Eleanor retained until her passing, would immediately transfer to Emma Callahan." There was a beat of stunned silence. And then the murmuring started. Guests whispered behind raised hands. Someone dropped a fork with a loud clatter. A few heads turned toward me, eyes wide with something between shock and curiosity. I sat frozen, my hands curled tightly in my lap. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard it felt like it might shatter them. George let out a harsh laugh, short and humorless. "That's absurd," he snapped. "My mother had no authority to—" "She did," Mr. Brooks interrupted smoothly. "She retained majority ownership until her death, as per the original company charter. It was never challenged." Victoria's face paled beneath her perfect makeup. Landon opened his mouth, then closed it again, his lips pressing into a thin line. Mr. Brooks broke the seal with a crisp motion. The parchment inside looked old, the handwriting unmistakably Eleanor's, elegant, looping, deliberate. He began to read aloud. In the event that my granddaughter, Emma Callahan, is deemed unworthy by her father or otherwise excluded from her rightful place within our family legacy, I hereby bequeath to her all my voting rights and controlling interest in Callahan Enterprises. This clause shall supersede any prior agreements or succession plans. The words hung in the air, as heavy and final as the autumn chill seeping through my dress. A gasp rippled through the gathering. Landon flushed a deep, angry red. Victoria's mouth opened in protest, but no sound emerged. George, stoic, invincible George, stared at the paper like it was a weapon he had never seen coming. My fingers found the compass pendant again, clenching it so tightly the edges dug into my skin. I felt dizzy, unmoored. Was this really happening? George straightened, drawing himself up to his full height. "This will be contested," he growled. "You think you can come in here with dusty papers and—" "You're welcome to pursue legal action," Mr. Brooks said, his tone mild, almost bored. "But I should remind you, the courts tend to honor notarized amendments, particularly those executed under proper witness and sealed protocol." For a long, crackling moment, no one moved, no one breathed. I rose slowly from my seat, the legs of my chair scraping softly against the ground. My knees felt wobbly, my palms damp, but somehow I stood. I looked around at the faces staring back at me. Some shocked, some curious, a few quietly pleased, and many wary. I wasn't the dreamer anymore. I wasn't the girl playing at charity while the real business of the world happened around her. Not tonight. Across the yard near the buffet tables, I caught a glimpse of Marisol Vega, our longtime housekeeper. She stood half hidden in the shadows, a plate balanced on one hand, forgotten. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. The wind shifted, rustling the golden leaves overhead. The fairy lights flickered. The night air grew sharper, colder, as if even nature recognized that something fundamental had changed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for a seat at the table. I owned the table. But with ownership came a different kind of burden, one I hadn't fully anticipated. The eyes on me weren't just curious anymore. They were expectant. I wasn't sure yet if they were hoping I would fail or daring me to prove them wrong. Either way, the choice was mine now, and it was a heavy, beautiful thing. Winning the battle on paper was one thing. Surviving the war in silence was another. I learned that quickly in the first few weeks after the will was read. The air in downtown Middlebury had turned brittle, the kind of cold that settled deep into your bones. Frost clung stubbornly to the corners of office windows, and the once bright maple trees now stood bare and skeletal against gray November skies. The world outside seemed stripped down to its essentials, and maybe that was fitting, because inside the headquarters of Callahan Enterprises, things were colder still. My heels clicked softly against the marble floors as I made my way to the boardroom. Every eye that turned toward me held the same thinly veiled calculation, skepticism, resentment, and something worse, dismissal. I wasn't the heir they had expected. I wasn't the leader they wanted. Real leadership isn't loud. It's steady. My grandmother's words anchored me as I crossed the threshold into the long wood-paneled room where the company's fate had been debated for decades. The senior board members sat stiffly around the gleaming oak table, their expressions polite but distant. Mr. Halpern, the retired VP who had served under my grandfather, offered a small, almost pitying nod. The rest gave nothing away. At the far end of the table, Landon sat, arms casually draped over the back of his chair, flashing a smile so wide it felt more like a baring of teeth. He rose when I entered, clapping his hands once, too loud in the hush. "Well, look who's gracing us with her presence," he said, the words coated in syrup. "Our new fearless leader." There were a few scattered chuckles, low and uneasy. I smiled tightly, taking my seat at the head of the table without comment. My gloves, thin leather against the chill, trembled slightly as I set down my folder of notes. I tucked my hands under the table to hide it. The meeting began, a series of reports and projections delivered in monotone voices. No one addressed me directly unless protocol demanded it. No one asked my opinion. When I did speak, brief, measured suggestions, they nodded as if indulging a child. Landon leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen idly against the table, his every movement radiating casual disdain. He was biding his time, waiting for me to stumble, betting that I would. But I had learned to fight quiet battles long before this. After the meeting, when the boardroom emptied and the day's false smiles faded into the frosty twilight, I stayed behind. Marisol slipped into the room with a cup of coffee, setting it silently by my elbow. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her small act of kindness said enough. I pulled up the financials on my laptop, my fingers steady now, tracing the numbers line by line. At first, everything looked routine. Quarterly reports, standard expenses, investment returns. But something gnawed at me. Tiny discrepancies, minor adjustments that didn't line up. A payment here, an overcharge there. I dug deeper. There it was, shell companies, all neatly registered under unrelated names, but the trail led back to familiar hands. Hidden beneath layers of legitimate transactions, Landon had been quietly siphoning funds for years, small enough amounts to escape notice, but large enough to matter when added up. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen as the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Outside, the street lamps flickered to life against the falling dusk. A slow, sick feeling coiled in my gut. If I moved too soon without full proof, Landon would turn it against me. He would claim inexperience, paranoia, incompetence. The board, already wary, might believe him. But if I waited too long, if I let him keep bleeding the company dry, I would be complicit by silence. The gloves on my hands, still cold from the boardroom, tightened into fists. Real leadership isn't loud, it's steady. I couldn't afford to let anger steer me. I couldn't afford to make a single wrong move. Across the dark office, Marisol caught my eye through the glass wall. She gave me a small, almost invisible nod, just like she had at the party weeks ago. A silent reminder that someone was watching. Someone believed. I closed the laptop softly. Tomorrow I would begin gathering everything. Emails, paper trails, witness statements. Quietly, methodically. I would not confront Landon today, but when the time came, I would be ready. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, swirling against the dark Vermont sky. The war wasn't over. It was just changing shape. It's easy to believe in yourself when no one's trying to break you. The real test comes when the world seems determined to watch you fall. December settled over Middlebury like a heavy gray blanket. Frost dusted the sidewalks, and the halls of Callahan Enterprises slowly emptied as employees ducked out early for holiday vacations. Wreaths and garlands lined the walls, but the festive decorations felt hollow, almost mocking. Tension crackled in the air, dry and sharp as brittle pine needles. I felt it each time I passed a cluster of whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I came near. I saw it in the sideways glances, the hurried steps. By the time I reached my office that Friday afternoon, I already knew something was wrong. The email alerts piling up on my phone were the first clue. The voicemail from our PR firm was the second. But it wasn't until I opened the first headline that I understood the full scope. Emma Callahan, heiress or hypocrite? Charity funds under scrutiny, Callahan legacy in jeopardy. Photos of me appeared beneath the headlines, lifted from public events, caught mid-laughter or mid-speech, now repurposed to frame a story I hadn't authored. The accusations were detailed, specific, and utterly false. Claims that I had misappropriated charity donations for personal gain, that I had siphoned funds into private accounts. They even included screenshots, fabricated, but convincing. I stared at the screen, my hands going numb. Steel is tested by fire, child. My grandmother's voice floated back to me, distant and soft. A sharp knock rattled the glass door. I looked up to see members of the PR team waiting outside, their faces tight, their bodies tense. I waved them in, my motions mechanical. They filled my office with a rush of nervous energy, firing questions I couldn't process fast enough. Damage control strategies, pre-drafted statements, advice to get ahead of the narrative. Landon arrived 5 minutes later, dressed too casually for the weather, smiling like a man who had just found a $20 bill on the sidewalk. "I heard the news," he said, all sympathy and concern. "Rough break." I met his gaze across the room, and for a moment the mask slipped. There, in the narrowness of his eyes, in the slight upturn of his mouth, I saw the truth. He was enjoying this. It was him. I didn't know exactly how, not yet, but I knew. The meeting blurred around me. Voices rose and fell, fingers pointed at potential reporters to contact, statements to draft, records to pull. I nodded when required, answered when prompted, but it was like moving underwater. Finally, they left one by one, with promises to reconvene Monday if the storm hadn't passed. By then I knew the damage would be done. The building emptied. The streets outside grew dark. Snow began to fall in soft, unbothered flakes, gathering along the windowsills and gutters. In my office, the only light came from the small desk lamp, casting long shadows against the far wall. I sat there long after everyone else had gone, staring at nothing, feeling everything. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't built for this. Maybe I had fooled myself into thinking I could survive in a world that had been wired from the beginning to see me fail. My hands shook as I pressed them flat against the desk. In the heavy silence, even breathing felt like a betrayal. Without thinking, my fingers found their way to the compass pendant at my neck. It was warm from my skin, a small, steady reminder of something older and stronger than the doubt crashing through me. I closed my eyes, willing myself to hear her voice again. Steel is tested by fire. But the words felt distant, unreachable. The tears came then, quiet, hot, and unstoppable. Not the dramatic kind that demanded comfort or attention. These tears slipped down unnoticed, pooling along the sharp line of my jaw, staining the wood beneath my folded arms. I didn't sob. I didn't heave. I just broke, silently, piece by piece, in a room that no longer felt like mine. It was the kind of breaking that isn't loud. It's slow. It's patient. It waits until you're alone and tired and too worn down to fight. I don't know how long I sat there, curled in on myself, staring at the floor. The soft click of the door opening barely registered. I didn't lift my head until a familiar scent, something like cinnamon and chamomile, reached me. Marisol. She didn't say anything at first. She simply crossed the room and placed a steaming mug of tea beside my hand, its warmth a small, stubborn defiance against the winter outside. And then, with gentle hands, she set down something else. A small, worn photograph. It was me. Maybe 8 years old, sitting cross-legged on the front lawn of the estate, grinning wildly at the camera, paint smeared on my cheeks, a half-finished birdhouse cradled in my lap. I stared at it. The edges of the photo frayed, the colors slightly faded. I didn't know why she had kept it. I didn't ask. Marisol rested a hand lightly on my shoulder. Just for a second. Just enough. "You were always meant to build things," she said softly, "not tear them down." And then she left, the door clicking quietly shut behind her. I sat there for a long moment, breathing in the scent of tea and old memories. The shaking in my hands eased, just slightly. I wasn't whole yet. I wasn't strong yet. But I was still here. And sometimes that's enough to start again. Strength isn't about crushing your enemies. It's about lifting yourself without losing who you are. Spring came late that year. Even in March, the mornings were damp and gray, the rain soft but insistent, tapping against the tall windows of Callahan Enterprises like a gentle drumbeat. I stood at the head of the largest conference room, breathing in the cool, clean air that smelled faintly of wet earth and old wood. The emergency board meeting had been called for 9 sharp. At 8:59, the room was already full. The senior board members sat stiffly, papers arranged neatly before them. Marisol stood off to one side, unobtrusive but steady, her presence a small anchor. Mr. Brooks waited near the end of the table, a folder in his hand. And Landon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking as if the outcome had already been decided. I let my fingers brush the compass pendant at my neck before stepping forward. "I won't take much of your time," I began, my voice even, steady, "but there are some facts that need to be placed on record." I gestured to Mr. Brooks, who connected his laptop to the room's projector. The first slide appeared. Clean, simple financial reports, side-by-side comparisons, a series of transactions highlighted in sharp red. "Over the past 3 years," I said, "substantial sums have been diverted from our operational budgets into shell companies, linked, through multiple layers, back to Mr. Landon Callahan." Murmurs rippled through the room. I clicked to the next slide. Surveillance footage from the accounting office, showing Landon accessing secure files at odd hours, transferring data with the urgency of a man who knew he was running out of time. "Here are the surveillance records," I said quietly, "and here are the corresponding emails and approval stamps signed under false pretenses." Landon's smirk faltered, his arms uncrossed. He opened his mouth, but for once, no slick words came out. Mr. Halpern, one of the oldest and most respected board members, leaned forward, his expression grave. "Do you have further evidence, Miss Callahan?" I nodded, handing out printed copies of the audit. Every page was a nail in the coffin Landon had built for himself. Still, when I looked at him, really looked, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something heavier, something closer to mourning. "Steel is tested by fire, child. You are your own North Star." "I'm not here to press charges," I said after a long pause, scanning the faces around the table. "I'm not here to destroy anyone." Landon's head jerked up, startled. "I'm here to rebuild what was broken," I continued, "not by shouting, not by scheming, but by leading differently." Silence blanketed the room. One by one, the board members turned toward each other, exchanging murmured comments. Then a vote was called. It was unanimous. Landon was officially removed, and I was named CEO of Callahan Enterprises. I exhaled slowly, feeling the last weight lift from my shoulders, not because I had conquered him, but because I had stayed true to myself. As the meeting adjourned and the others filtered out, I noticed someone lingering near the back of the room. George Callahan. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't interfered. He hadn't defended me. But as I gathered my notes, Marisol appeared at my elbow, pressing something into my hand. A folded check. I opened it carefully. It was made out to the women's shelter I had founded years ago. The amount was staggering. And at the bottom, in sharp, almost angry handwriting, was my father's signature. No note, no apology, but maybe a beginning. I left the conference room without looking back. The rain had picked up slightly, a fine mist soaking the air, soft and persistent. I stepped outside without an umbrella, letting the cool droplets kiss my skin. The compass pendant warmed against my chest, no longer heavy, no longer a burden. It wasn't validation I carried now. It was my own quiet certainty. And as I walked through the rain toward a future of my own making, I understood what my grandmother had meant all along. Strength wasn't about who you conquered. It was about who you chose to become when no one else was watching. The rain that morning was soft but steady, much like the quiet strength I had found within myself. Holding my grandmother's compass against my heart, I realized true power had never been about winning. It had always been about staying true. In this life, maybe what defines us isn't how loudly we fight, but how gently we choose to rebuild. If this story touched something in you, I invite you to share your own thoughts about strength, family, and the quiet battles we all face. I'd love to hear your reflections.